What's up, guys? Welcome to More Than a Conversation, episode number 12. It is me, your host, General EMC, and I am joined by my incredible co host, Forever the Arrowverse.
What's good, guys?
And this week, we chose to hit you guys with something special that we haven't really talked about when on the podcast. However, this is something that Forever's finally starting to get into. So, what's our first topic, Forever?
College football.
Yes, sir. My man,
Probably our only topic.
my man finally decided to adopt Southern heritage and start watching college football.
Well, for reference, I did start last year, but it was only for Georgia Tech. So it wasn't like the entire college football experience. I only liked my team and only watched my team.
Yeah. But once you immerse yourself in this world, there's like no turning back. Like, there's nothing like the college football atmosphere from what I've seen. Like I don't get from I hear it from a lot of people actually, but you don't get the same satisfaction or like passion from pro football games. But it's like college football games are absolutely wild. Um, so
Oh, I mean, they got stuff to prove out there. Once you go pro, you kind of just go pro. You know what I'm saying?
yeah, I mean once you go pro, it's supposedly the best of the best. But we kind of talked about this the other day. But in college football, there's this kind of freshness because the team changes basically every year essentially.
hmm
I mean, we all
Especially with the transfer portal now.
yeah, and like we initially made the comment that the teams change like every 4 years, but I think by every 4 years we mean that like you won't have any of those same players. In 4 years' time, each player
Yeah.
that started will be gone. But
hmm
however, with transfer portal, people going pro, these teams get loads of new players and a new makeup
Yep.
every single season. So it's something fresh.
hmm
And there's always that like passion and emotion in it. I mean, I remember I'm a big Bulldogs fan. I remember when the Bulldogs won the 2021 national championship, my family actually started crying in the living room after the Bulldogs won the national championship
That's crazy.
because
I
that
cry. I cry too, just when Tech loses
bruh,
for opposite reasons. You know.
yeah, you're gonna we're not gonna talk about tech right now, but uh, but
We're gonna have to eventually cover it, bro.
we'll have to cover it, but basically, yeah, college football. I mean, it is one of the most American sports out there, and we love it, and a lot of people in the country love it too. And so, week one just passed, hasn't it? Forever.
hmm
I mean, we went through week one, and here, starting the next few days, we'll probably start getting week two games. I didn't notice the exact date of when they're going to be starting, but week two is going to be
Probably
wrapping up.
Friday.
Probably Friday. But week two is going to
I
be
would say so.
kicking off soon, and there's some games to look forward to. I haven't really scoped out the schedule. I'll kind of pull that up on my phone real quick and set that on the sidelines. But what was one of your favorite games you got to watch last week? Forever
Biasly Georgia Tech.
biasly Georgia Tech.
But I got heartbroken. So
Yeah, I mean that's
I did enjoy the first half of the Florida State and LSU game.
yeah, that
Um,
game was
I
wild,
ended up I ended up falling asleep and missing the good parts.
bruh.
I woke up and it was like the game was already over and like Florida State like walked all over them and I was like, man.
Yeah, because like initially, like it was like
At
initial
halftime it
theory.
was pretty even.
Yeah, halftime was pretty even, but like
Yeah.
I had heard like so many theories saying that like, oh yeah, LSU They're gonna go blow Florida State out of the water. But Florida State pulled the upset in taking down the number 5 LSU, which is wild. I mean, and I'm looking at the
Now, I'm
rankings
not.
right now. Florida State,
Mhm.
from that one win alone, jumped from the number 8 seed to the number 4 seed,
Wow.
which means someone got knocked down a peg.
All right. Can
Georgia,
you kind of like,
Georgia's still number 1.
uh,
That's who it was.
sadly.
Ohio State. They got the short end of the stick. So basically, all the top 5 or all the top 4 teams won. Your top 4 is usually Georgia, Alabama, Ohio State, Michigan, and it was Georgia number 1, Ohio State 2, Michigan 3, Bama 4, LSU 5. However, after the LSU game, Florida State moves up to number 4. And Ohio State got bumped down from the number 2 seed all the way back down to the number 5 seed.
Can you explain rankings and how like
Okay, rankings?
they work? Like I have a general idea of it, but I want to know like
mean-
the logistics to actually like. I know
I
obviously
can't-
winning games and performing well gets you better chances at a
Yeah.
rank system.
Basically,
But like,
the
how did they
rankings-
decipher like it? Because Ohio State won too, right?
Yeah, Ohio State won.
So are they just basing like Florida State's performance or
That's one of the main things. Is so moving up
so
the
like
rankings.
if both teams wins, it's like basically who had the better performance?
Essentially, that's why a lot of people were worried after the Georgia game, because Georgia, they won by like 41 points, 42 points. However, it was such a sloppy game on Georgia's behalf that people
Like
thought they were going
defensively or offensively?
to. Our run game was kind of bad. Carson Beck, he wasn't doing the best.
Because I'll never watch a Georgia game in my life. So
Bruh. Yes, you will. Rivalry game at the
oh
end
yeah,
of the season.
oh yeah. Well, yeah, I guess I will.
Yeah.
But technically, that's a Tech game. So
Yeah, but from my end, it's a Georgia game. But that's beside the point. But basically, how the rankings work is normally winning, it gives you good standards. So basically, there's a committee that's out there, and this committee, they look at all of these games, the scores, how the game went, and based off performance, rank a team up higher.
Mhm.
Okay, so a team like Florida State was number 8. They beat a higher ranked team. Okay, so that gets you good standings. You beat a team that's ranked higher than you. Not only do you win that game, but you really play really good. That gets you some standings. And then just winning in general gets you some standings. And so winning, performance, beating a team ranked higher than you, those are all things that work in your favor in moving up. So like I'm looking at week 2 to look for a good example of one.
So Duke's upset on Clemson. Like that,
Okay.
like that helped Duke's ability to get ranked. 'Cause they were not
I'll
ranked,
see in a
right?
second. I need to see what Clemson used to be ranked on our photo slides.
Clemson was like ranked 7 or 8, I think.
Okay, ranked number 9.
Or
Okay.
9.
Clemson was ranked number 9. They got beat by Duke. Clemson dropped all the way down to the 25th place, from 9th to 25th, from one loss.
That's crazy.
Okay, let me pull up the rankings and see if Duke moved up. Yeah, Duke, unranked, after that game, moved up to the 21st seed.
Interesting.
Also, a fun thing to look at. We saw the big upsets, right? The LSU upset and the Clemson upset.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting looking at it. On ESPN, it shows Clemson dropped 16 places after their loss, and LSU dropped 9 places after their loss, which the LSU game is more forgiving because they got beat by a team that was ranked, and
Right.
at being ranked, they were
Okay.
only a few spots lower than them, so they didn't take as big a hit.
Okay.
Unlike
Okay.
Clemson and TCU got beat by unranked teams, and that just kills their season essentially. Like TCU's probably done this season. Like they'll have to do the same thing Clemson did. They'll have to win out, and they'll have to get some impressive wins to get good standings again. But after the TCU loss and the Clemson loss, both Duke and Colorado, unranked teams, moved up from being unranked to Duke is now 21, and um, Colorado's 22. And so that was crazy to see. See both of these teams moving up, and I hope they have good seasons. ACC.
The only team that needs to win out is Georgia Tech.
Yeah, Georgia Tech. The only way they're going to get good standings is if they win out their season
and beat Georgia.
And beat Georgia. That's the only way that they're going to actually get like public recognition right now.
I bet you we beat Georgia.
What?
Bet you we beat Georgia.
See, but the thing is, right, you could, but it would require you winning out and beating Georgia to, like, be in contention for a top 5 seat. However, that requires you winning out. And Tech doesn't have a good record at winning out their seasons, and they haven't in 40-plus years.
Thanks for the reminder.
Yeah. So they're going to have to overcome some adversity, and that first loss to Louisville didn't really help them out. Okay?
Yeah.
And so they're definitely going to have to jump some hurdles to try and make it to the top seeds. But looking back at the current rankings, basically we just see a lot of teams just moved up the ranks. We had a bunch of big teams get knocked down a little bit, and so we see North Carolina. They jumped up 4 spots after when they beat South Carolina. Which tough for the SEC, but maybe it'll shed some spotlight on the ACC. ACC for a long time has just been that conference that gets overlooked, except for Clemson. ACC basically had a bunch of colleges that were once good, but they're not really that good anymore. And it was basically just Clemson having to carry the ACC on its shoulders just to give it attention. But now this season, I mean, FSU.
Now, do you think with Clemson losing game 1 that they have a good chance with winning out, or do you think they're like mentally stumped now?
Well, I'll need to go look. Well, it's definitely gonna hurt them going forward. However, Clemson has it's gonna be tough for Clemson. Okay, so Clemson going forward, they're going to have to play Florida State at one point this season. They're gonna have to play Notre Dame at some point this season. Which both of those are top 10 teams. You're also gonna you get your shot. Georgia Tech's gonna play Clemson at one point this season in November. So you could pray that Tech beats Clemson, and that will get you some good standings. Then Clemson, right after the Tech game, jumps into North Carolina and South Carolina. North Carolina, we watched them kind of bully South Carolina, but South Carolina, they have this weird mentality that when they play really good teams, they suddenly play like all-stars. Like South Carolina last season almost beat Georgia, and then at the end of the season beat Tennessee and Clemson and killed their playoff run right there. South Carolina had no shot at going to the finals. However, they went in and beat Clemson and Tennessee, and with those losses, they stood no chance at making it into the playoffs. When South Carolina, South Carolina went on a killing spree and just took them out. So South Carolina, they've beat Clemson before, and there's a chance they could do it all again, but we'll have to watch and see. But Clemson's got a pretty tough schedule ahead of them, so it looks like it's not going to be in the cards for Clemson to make a playoff run this season.
I saw that graphic you sent me earlier about them being eliminated from postseason contention.
Yeah, I think,
already.
Yeah, that's just what the graphs are looking at right now. I'm going to look at Tech's season right now. Tech, you got some big games. You got Ole Miss that has
We're destroying them. We're gonna walk all over them.
well,
62-32 is going to be the final score.
yeah, they say based off statistics right now,
That was a joke, by the way.
yeah, based off.
I don't think our offense is capable of scoring 62 in a game.
Yeah, based off the statistics, Tech only has an 11% chance to beat Ole Miss. And Ole Miss, right?
Mhm.
Ole Miss is one of those, deep South teams. SEC West. SEC West is kind of scary. Ole Miss is actually a team that actually puts Alabama on the ropes almost every game they play Alabama, and Alabama's supposed to be one of the best teams in the league. So
Alabama's
basically,
garbage.
one of the few teams that's in the league that can knock Alabama off its pedestal. Y'all got to play them like third game of the season.
We do?
Yeah,
Tech does?
yeah. Tech plays Ole Miss like third game this season.
Oh, man, I thought you meant Alabama.
Nah, Ole Miss will probably play Alabama at some point, but then y'all got a tough game later in the season.
I thought you meant Tech plays Alabama week 3, and I was like,
Nah. Tech will probably never play Alabama.
Yeah, Tech plays Ole Miss week 3.
Yeah. And then they got to play North Carolina later. That's going to be a tough game. They got to play Clemson. That's going to be a tough game. Then they got probably the hardest game of the season at the rivalry game going against UGA at the number 1 seed. That's going to be y'all's toughest game this season.
Pish posh, we're beating you.
Okay.
I don't care what you
I'm not
say,
saying
bro.
this from a biased perspective. Statistically, that's supposed to be y'all's toughest game.
Yeah.
Stat wise.
And granted, so y'all haven't lost a game in like 2 years, right?
Hey, look, we got Messiah popping into the stream. Thank you for tuning in, Messiah. So yeah, but things kind of got shaped up interesting, after week 1, and we're looking forward to week 2. So as soon as these
do you know the schedule for week 2? Are you looking at that right now?
I'm about to pull it back up, but I'm about to pause our little slideshow on the scores from week 1, and we'll kind of talk about those games a little bit.
Okay. And then what in the podcast with like, what potential upsets we'll see this weekend?
Yeah, we can talk about that.
Okay.
Okay, we'll pause it there.
Here we go.
Opening up the week 2 schedule now. All right.
This is week 2 schedule, or just talking about week 1 scores?
These are the scores. Okay, we'll kind of
okay.
wrap the podcast up talking about week 2. So first game on our list is UT Martin versus UGA. 48-7. Bulldogs won by 41 points. Absolutely bullied UT Martin. However, it was an incredibly sloppy game on Georgia's behalf. I mean, we went into halftime. The score was 17-0 at halftime. And we scored.
Yeah, like that's a bad thing.
Well, yeah. The thing was, due to the team we were playing, it was supposed to be a lot higher spread. We were based off statistics, Georgia was supposed to have close to 28 by halftime. To keep on par with the other teams or all the other top 5 teams. Like Alabama was winning by almost 30 points going into halftime, again in their game. But Georgia, 17 points. I mean, got lucky with UT Martin missing a field goal at one point, and so it was looking like a really rough game. But Georgia went into that locker room, and Kirby Smart probably chewed those players up left and right, and then it was a different team that came out of that locker room. And it was also a different quarterback. He swapped it from Carson Beck to Brock Vandagriff to finish out the rest of the game.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting. I told you Saturday that I wasn't too sure about your new QB.
Yeah, I think this game he still has that. I still think this is what I think happened. I think Carson Beck, he feels that pressure on his shoulders.
Yeah.
It's not like he's fighting for anything, but he's been
Hmm.
nominated, the starting quarterback. He's got that pressure on his shoulders. He's going into the first game as a new quarterback, about to make a statement on the world, and I think he just crumbled under the pressure. But then you pull up the
I mean,
backups. I
yeah.
think you pull up the backups and Vandergriff and Stockton, who
Hmm.
didn't think they had a shot, essentially.
Hmm.
And so now they're actually like, instead of crumbling under the pressure, they're like, this is my time to shine, essentially. And
Hmm.
Vandergriff made Carson Beck look like a chump. He went in there, made some deep passes, made some good plays, did some running, and basically looked like a lot better quarterback than Carson
Hmm.
Beck. And then at the end of the game, they let Gunnar Stockton play the last half of the fourth quarter, and Stockton did pretty good. Um, and so Carson Beck just looked rough, but our two backups are still looking pretty good. And so kind of a sloppy game on Georgia's behalf. I mean, you look at the spread on that. I mean, Georgia scored 7 in the first, 10 in the second, but then on the third scored 14, and the fourth scored 17. Um, so they definitely scored a lot more points in the second half after Kirby chewed them out a little bit. But moving on, and UT Martin, they played good. They shut down our run game. Georgia couldn't really get a run game going off because UT Martin's defense was doing really good. And I always saw UT Martin was supposed to be one of those chump schools, but apparently they're one of the top teams in their conference, and they've actually been like conference champions like 2 years in a row now or something.
Really?
Yeah, and so like their
So they
conference
just got a weak conference?
probably. I haven't looked at the teams in that conference, but it would be like UGA playing like Troy or University of Southern Alabama. USA and Troy go back to back in the Sun Belt Conference, which is where Georgia State plays, and
Hmm.
one of them usually wins out the conference, or Coastal Carolina every season.
Okay.
And so it'd be like picking on the top team in their conference, kind of like how Clemson was. Clemson was ACC weak conference, and
Hmm.
Clemson's the top dog in the conference.
Hmm.
And it would be like playing them. That's why there was so much hype in that game still, because it's like top dog in that conference, and they just got whooped. Um, and so UT Martin, they did good, but at the end of the day, the dogs came out on top. So moving on to the next game. Don't know a whole lot about East Carolina, but I do know a lot about Michigan. They've scared a lot of teams in the past. Big rivalry with Ohio State. And even still, Michigan, the number 2 team, only won 30-3.
Hmm.
I mean, Georgia, they played a sloppy game against UT Martin, but still
Hmm.
put up 48 on the team, while Michigan played East Carolina, only scored 30. And even the same thing, this is why Ohio State drops down. Ohio State's supposed to be the number 3 team in the nation, and they only put up 23 against unranked Indiana.
Do you think that's like week one jitters and just kind of getting
Probably.
everything
I mean, the only
warmed up for the
only
season?
top 4 team that really outperformed themselves was Alabama, but that's expected. Alabama basically just picked on like the weakest team in Tennessee and just shoot them up and spit them out.
I mean, their college name is literally called Middle Tennessee, so.
Yeah, and so Alabama, but actually, if you look at it, Alabama only scored like one more touchdown than Georgia, essentially.
Yeah.
So Georgia, didn't do too bad compared to Alabama. But yeah, all those games, the top 4.
Alabama was consistent though. Two touchdowns a quarter, bro. Not bad.
Not bad at all.
I mean, just 14s across the board.
Okay, going on to the next one, and okay. USC, really good game. USC, I
Yeah.
think they stayed at the 6th seed, but I think they still
Probably
got
just gave up a little bit too much points to Nevada than they would have liked.
Yeah, I mean, stellar first quarter and stellar last quarter for them. The third quarter was kind of rough, but I think they still got the same quarterback they had last season in Caleb Williams. I think he got the Heisman last season too.
Really?
And so they got a returning Heisman quarterback back this season. I mean, he was the only like all-star quarterback that stayed. I mean, TCU's quarterback left, Georgia's quarterback left, Ohio State quarterback left, Bama quarterback left.
Like transferred or
Went pro.
drafted.
Went pro.
Okay.
And so like out of like all like the top schools, USC was the only one that actually had their quarterback stay. And then moving on from that game, Penn State, they whooped up on West Virginia. RIP West Virginia, Mountain Mama, all that thing.
I mean,
but it wasn't really.
That wasn't a bad game.
It wasn't really a bad game. But
mean,
Penn State, from what I've been hearing, is supposed to be one of those sleeper teams that usually has good contention every season, but never capitalizes on it. They never really take it to the playoffs or anything like that. Number 10, Washington, did pretty good against Boise State. Boise State had some good seasons a while ago, but it's been a while. Strongman Texas coming in on top. Future SEC prospect coming to us in 2024. But I have no idea who Rice even is. I've never even heard of that college before. And they only beat him by three touchdowns. Notre Dame did Notre Dame things. Also played a really weak Tennessee team, and probably we'll see a lot of the same thing. Notre Dame's probably going to play a lot of weak schools, unlike the.
Is that 28 in the second quarter?
Yeah.
That's crazy.
They'll probably play a lot of weak schools, unlike Clemson. They got a big game up ahead of them in Clemson coming up.
Mm-hmm.
And then I think they play Tech too. So woo. Go
Yeah.
Tech, take down Notre Dame because someone needs to. I hate Notre Dame with a passion. Gosh.
Yes.
But Notre Dame, I've told you this before. Notre Dame basically just plays nobodies and gets put in the top 10 every season. It would be like if Georgia played a bunch of schools that's like ACC caliber, like went and played Louisville, Tech, Duke, played teams like that all season, and then was just like, oh, look, we're going to give you the number 5 seed because you did really good. like you beat a bunch of teams that don't really have playoff contention, and you're going to get praised.
But on the off chance, what if they lose to one of those teams?
Then the other team's going to look really good.
Or Georgia looks really bad.
Yeah. And so Notre Dame did that. Number 15, Oregon, one of those few crazy games we had with an absurd amount of points. Oregon beating Portland State 81-7.
That's
not
crazy.
Too much to talk about there because that's just a slaughter. Kansas State.
Yeah.
Kansas State, I hope they do good this season. I've seen them do good in the past, and we need some good, Mountain West teams or whatever it is. We need some good teams out there. And Kansas State, they tend to have a pretty average season. They've made it to the top 10 a few times, but nothing too fancy. And then there was the big game from last week. Colorado versus TCU. What?
Man, that was a matchup, bro.
That game was hard.
For reference, me, you, and a buddy of mine were at my best friend's baby shower, and we were checking the scores of that game the entire time we were there.
Yeah. But also TCU was kind of consistent, though. 0 in the first, but 14, 14, 14.
Yeah.
And then you can tell Colorado kind of just ramped it up 7, 10, then 14, 14. They really ramped it up to compete on the same level as TCU in that second half, and they're really good, and they got the payoff for it. And so, congrats to Colorado. TCU's unranked now. Colorado's 22.
Hot take: I think Colorado's going to have a very good season.
I actually need to pull it up and look at their schedule. Week 1. Let me pull up Colorado.
They're that sleeper team, bro.
Sleeper team, I know. Colorado. Okay, they play weak team, weak team. Oh, two big games. They play against Oregon that we just saw whooped Portland 81-7. That's going to be a big game for them. Then they also play number 6 USC.
Hmm.
And then they're also going to play Oregon State, which Oregon State to me doesn't get a lot of attention, and it really deserves more attention. Oregon State is really one of those upset caliber teams, not a team that's going to go in and have a stellar season and compete in championships, but is one of
Hmm.
those teams that just goes pretty average, gets close to 10 wins, and beats some big teams every season. And so Oregon State, that's going to be a big game. A couple nobodies, and then they play Utah, but I don't think they got to worry about Utah too much.
So they could have a decent season.
If they can pull off, if they can, if they'll have a pretty decent season. However, if they can beat Oregon, USC, and Oregon State, I think that puts them in the top 10. Actually, probably top 5, if they beat all of
Interesting.
those teams. Um,
Interesting.
and not just beat them, but make it a good game and actually, put a few extra touchdowns on them.
Hmm.
That will raise some eyebrows. Um, we had the Oklahoma game. Oklahoma,
Wild. 73-0 is crazy.
it is, but they beat Arkansas State. That's a little Sun Belt Conference team, so it's not. It's not.
I
Too,
mean,
it's not.
I
Too,
mean, sure, but like getting a goose egg in a 60-minute game is kind of crazy.
yeah. But Arkansas State, RIP. Respect from Georgia State perspective, because you're a Sun Belt team competing against a top 20 team, so respects. South Carolina got humiliated, but who knows? We may see wild card South Carolina come alive at the end of the season, then have a terrible season, but do good against the powerful teams at the end of the season. Mercer, not too much to be said about them, but they played Ole Miss, and like I said, Ole Miss, Tech, you're going to be playing them in week 3, and they beat Mercer 73-7.
Yay.
And then yeah, and New Mexico, Texas A&M. I like Texas A&M. They're also one of those teams that gives Alabama some scares, just like Ole Miss. I mean, SEC West is a scary section in the SEC. There's our thing we were talking about earlier, the LSU humiliation when it came to Florida State whooping them up.
Yes, sir.
Uh,
For those of you that don't know, I'm not a big a fan of LSU in general, like their entire athletic department.
yeah. So Florida State, bringing hope back to the ACC, and we'll go ahead and jump down to the Clemson game. I'll come back to the Oregon State, but if Clemson would have won, and then you have Florida State win, that puts you like a number 5 and number 6 seed. Well, I don't think Clemson moves. I think Clemson probably moves up to 8. Florida State moves up to like 6. So that puts you 2 high-ranking ACC teams, and it puts ACC back on the map. However, with Clemson being taken down by Duke, that puts 2 ACC teams and between 20 and 25, and just leaves all the pressure on Florida State to do good in the top 10.
That's crazy.
So Clemson, with that loss to Duke, basically just abandoned Florida State in the top 10, and now all the pressure is going to be on Florida State to carry the ACC this season.
Oof.
And then we're going to talk about Oregon State. We talked about them. That's one of those teams Colorado's got to go against this season. Beat San
Yeah,
Jose
and you said
State.
that you thought that they deserve more recognition.
Yeah, Oregon State
That's the team.
definitely,
Okay.
deserves a little more recognition. Do I got another slide in here? Okay. Wake Forest. No. Oh, this is the ACC thing. I was gonna, I only did this just to show off the Tech thing, and we could, relive your past trauma with Tech's loss. But RIP Tech. Tech fought hard. But basically, kind of a one-sided like thing. I mean, Louisville did good kind of across the board, but Tech just had a phenomenal like second quarter, and that was about it.
Yeah, and just yeah, we just didn't really do anything after.
Before or after.
Oh yeah, well,
0 in the first,
yeah,
28
but
in the second,
the thing
0 in
is
the
like
third.
that first quarter you can excuse,
Yeah.
you know,
And I'm
beginning
guessing
season
Louisville just kicked
jitters,
2 field goals in that first
you
game.
know, yeah,
Or first quarter, I mean. And then touchdown. I mean, 1 touchdown to y'all's 4. And then they scored 10, y'all got none. And they scored 16, and y'all only got 6. So, yeah, that's kind of tough. But we'll let that play. And then I will pull up the games coming up. I mean, before we get into the big games, I mean, obviously, I've got to say who Georgia State's playing first because, Georgia State won their first game. And so Georgia State,
as Georgia State alum, yay.
yay. Yeah, Georgia State won their first game. If my internet would let me open it, because ESPN was working earlier, but it's acting
Oh
up.
man,
But GSU has a 61% chance to win the game against UConn. I hope they do. It would be a great way to start your season off 2-0. And
is UConn a strong football team?
not really. But
They're decent at basketball. So I was like,
if Georgia State can go undefeated and then beat LSU, that'll give them a top 5 seed. If they can go undefeated, because LSU is going to be the toughest game all season.
And you said talk about Georgia State.
Yeah, LSU is going to be the toughest game for Georgia State.
So you think Georgia State has that chance of being ranked at some point this season?
Yeah, I think that if they can win out and pull an upset on LSU, then I think that puts them like they're not going to be anything big. They're going to be like 24, 25.
Mm-hmm.
And that'll be end of the season rankings. Like it'll be like the last poll before playoffs, so it won't even matter really.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, I need to pull back NCAA football. Then we'll look at ACC real quick just for this. Tech plays South Carolina State. Y'all should have that game in the bag because unlike y'all with 1 loss, South Carolina State has 2 losses already. And so y'all have a chance versus them. And so good luck to that. Now going on to the top 25 games. UGA versus Ball State, or number 1 UGA versus unranked Ball State. UGA statistically should walk all over Ball State. I mean, they only gave Ball State a 1.3% chance to beat Georgia, and Georgia a 98.7% chance to win the game.
Oof.
So kind of one-sided, but Ball State, they could shock the world. They're actually saying Georgia's supposed to win like 42-0, just stat-wise.
Oof.
But Georgia is supposed to win. Ohio State, they've got to, play a makeup game. They need to beat Youngstown State, and then they need to do it pretty effectively and put themselves back in that top 4 for playoff contention. Penn State plays Delaware. Penn State should walk all over them. Notre Dame playing NC State. Notre Dame, number 10 Notre Dame should whack up NC State. Number 12 Utah should beat Baylor. Here's our first Sun Belt team. Sun Belt team competing against a Kansas State. Troy. Troy is one of the better Sun Belt Conference teams, and so fingers crossed they can do something versus Kansas State and put them on the map. Colorado's playing Nebraska. Colorado should win that game, even though they say they're supposed to win it by 3. Clemson has got to, do something fancy against Charleston Southern because Clemson's ranked number 25, 0-1, and Charleston Southern is 1-0, so they've got a better win rank in Clemson right now, and so Clemson needs to go whoop up on them to show that they're still competitive. Clemson's going to whoop up on UNLV. One of the big games is going to be Ole Miss versus Tulane. Tulane's one of those sleeper colleges that kind of just does mediocre every season but has potential to do good. So Ole Miss versus Tulane. Both of these are really good teams, in my opinion. Ole Miss should win it, but Tulane would get a lot of respect and attention if they beat Ole Miss. A&M is playing Miami. A&M should win. Washington plays Tulsa. Not really worth investigating. Washington should whoop up on them. Tennessee versus Austin Peay. Tennessee's ranked number 9 right now. They should definitely whoop up Austin Peay. Up here comes another Sun Belt team, and that of Appalachian State. App State is a Sun Belt team, and they are playing North Carolina from the ACC. And fingers crossed App State does something good for our Sun Belt teams, but North Carolina is supposed to beat them by like 2 touchdowns. Oklahoma moved up 2 seeds from 20th place to 18th place, and they're going to go whoop up on SMU. Duke should win their game now that they're ranked 21. Big game of the season. Here comes probably the biggest game. It's going to be in the highlights.
The biggest game of the season already?
I mean, not biggest game of the season. The biggest game for week 2.
Oh, the game of the okay.
Biggest game for week 2. Number 11 Texas versus number 3 Alabama.
Suddenly I'm a Texas fan this week.
Yeah. Texas, for some reason, they're just like Ole Miss. Every season they play Alabama, they always put them on the ropes. Just can never choke them out. Texas last season, I think, played Alabama. Was within a touchdown, but Alabama just went down at the end of the field, scored a touchdown, and basically just lost Texas's chance at beating them. So Texas, they have a shot.
Unfortunate.
I mean, even still, we saw how Alabama blew out the other team by like 7 touchdowns. They're only saying Alabama's supposed to win this game by 7 points. They're giving Alabama a 1 touchdown difference to win the game.
Wow.
So that's going to be a big game. Number 13, Oregon is going to go whoop up Texas Tech. LSU is probably whooping up Grambling, but LSU.
Nah, bro, LSU got that L in their name for a reason,
Yeah. Go Raging Cajuns, not Tigers. But Wisconsin's going to beat Washington State most likely. Look at that. 3rd Sun Belt team playing a ranked team, and that is Southern Missouri, which is, one of those Sun Belt West teams. I mean, for some reason, it's like the West and the Southeastern conferences. Sun Belt and SEC Western side teams are more dominant. Southern Miss was one of the top teams last season for Sun Belt, and they're taking on none other than number 4 Florida State, and so Florida State's probably walking all over them.
Probably.
Oregon State.
I was thoroughly impressed with Florida State's QB.
Yeah. Then we got USC is going to whoop up Stanford, and Oregon State's going to whoop up UC Davis. And so that's about it for the ranked games next season. Going ahead and looking forward to
next week.
Yeah. Flashing.
You said next season. I was like, wow.
Yeah, I'm sorry. But I kind of just went ahead and just take a forecast at like week 3. And I think that's when you see a lot of your like.
That's when people start actually getting into like good games and like warmed up. So all these good teams are actually playing good teams.
Not really. I'm looking at a lot of them, and it's actually still a lot of weak teams. A lot of conference games will start taking place, but nothing too fancy. I mean, I'm trying to figure out what the biggest game of the week's going to be, and so far it looks like my top game for the week is Georgia versus South Carolina. Not going to lie.
Over Tech and Ole Miss?
Well, that's not. No offense, but that's not really a game. that's going to be on people's radar. People are just basically going to drum that game up as people are going to drum that game up as a blowout by Ole Miss.
I feel attacked.
Tech's only got that 11% chance to win that we talked about earlier, and so
I feel attacked.
I'm not saying that against you. I'm just saying it stat wise. People are much more apt to turn into a Georgia versus South Carolina than Georgia Tech versus Ole Miss because people know kind of the direction that's going to take already. Once again, no offense to you, but the rest of the games, yeah, it's all week. So top game for week 3 is probably
Interesting.
Probably Georgia game. Week 4, we get some big games in week 4. We get big games in week 4. Week 4, Alabama versus Ole Miss. Alabama number 3, Ole Miss number 20. Ole Miss has put Alabama on the ropes before, but let's see if Ole Miss can capitalize on it. Number 4, Florida State versus 25, Clemson. Clemson, they need to beat Florida State to put themselves back on the radar, but do they drag their fellow ACC team down to pull themselves up in the bracket, or does Clemson accept its fate and just lose?
Quick question. In order to make the playoffs, you have to be ranked in the top 4, like 1, 2, 3, and 4?
Yep. So right now,
Interesting.
if the season ended right now, Florida State's going to the playoffs against Georgia.
Interesting.
You'd have Georgia versus Florida State, and then you would have Alabama versus Michigan, and then the winner of those 2 games would move on.
So let's just say the top 6 ranked teams are all undefeated.
The top 4.
They just choose 2 of the
The top 4 goes because there isn't just. It's not just.
So it's
the
not
fact that
just
they're
about
undefeated.
being undefeated. It's about.
There's probably going to be an undefeated team in the 22nd spot.
Really?
Probably, but they're going to be from a minor conference that doesn't play anybody.
Interesting.
It's going to be like say Georgia State wins all of their games. Georgia State goes undefeated. Georgia State's going to end the season 14-0, but they're not going to break the 20th spot. They'll stay somewhere under 20 because they don't play any big teams. So now if Georgia State went out and beat teams like if they went out and beat Georgia or went out and would beat and if they can go out and beat a Florida State, an Oregon, and a Georgia, that puts them on radar and puts them in the top 5. However,
Interesting.
The only thing that's going to give them prominence is if they win out and beat LSU. They'll have to go undefeated, and that's just to even put them in the top 25 only.
I see.
So basically, it boils down to, it's kind of crazy. It boils down to tradition, what your team's usually ranked. It boils down to tradition, how your school's looked at. It boils down to how good are the games you're playing. So do you play a lot of good teams or are you playing a bunch of weak teams? How bad do you beat all the teams you play? Are you struggling against everyone or are you actually dominating the field? And then win records, things like that. And so it's all these factors that go into it. And so Georgia State could go undefeated, but no one's talking about the fact that Georgia State beat Louisiana Monroe or Georgia Southern. That's not what puts them on the radar. They got to go beat some big teams to catch attention.
Gotcha.
And then if they somehow if miraculously Georgia State makes it to the top 15, and that's where they end their season, they'll be put up against better teams next season. They'll get some more bigger games.
Got you.
And if they can win those games, that raises precedence more.
All right.
But
I'm just used to that traditional ranking system, the seeding system of win losses. That's it.
Yeah.
Nothing else is taken into account.
But the reason they do it like that is because there's over 1,000 colleges in the United States, man.
Yeah.
If they based it off win records, there would be like 60 teams all tied for first place for just having their perfect win records. There would be 60 teams tied for first place, so they have to
Yeah.
break it off into power. How well does this team do against other teams? And so that's why you tend to see the same
Right.
teams ranked every year, and you don't see a lot of new teams shaking up the bracket.
That makes sense.
Um, and then also, like I said earlier, it's all in a committee voting on it. Really, a committee kind of gets together and votes on where teams should be placed each week,
Mm-hmm.
and so that committee isn't going to look out to that team out in South Dakota that won their game 65-0 in a little town no one's even heard about. They're not going to be looking at those teams. They're going to be looking at OMG, Oregon or Oklahoma just whooped up 73-0 to this team that no one's heard about.
Okay.
And so it kind of just goes on precedence and the type of teams it is and the type of teams playing. So yeah, but it's I like it, and it's also one of those things that like you don't like it, but you see why they do it. Like you feel bad because there's a lot of good teams out there that don't get recognition, but how can you? And so that's why they tend to get championship games and bowl games and such like that, just so they get something. They're not competing for the national championship, but they're still.
I got you.
If they win out, they're gonna walk away with 2 trophies. From a bowl win and a championship or a state championship win.
All right.
So yeah, so that's kind of a rundown on college football. Looking forward to next week's matches. Nothing too fancy, but there could be more upsets. There could be more blowouts. But who knows? Maybe you just got to tune in and watch some college football. And who knows? Maybe forever we'll get more engulfed into this world. And instead of just watching Tech play, go out and watch every single football game anytime he sees it on the TV.
I don't have cable, so it's not easy for me.
See, for me, when I come home in the evenings on the weekends, I cut on the TV, go to the sports channels, and just scroll through. It could be 2 colleges I've never heard of before, but as long as it's got that label, college football, on it, I'm watching it. Just because I love college football that much. So who knows? Big wins coming up, big losses coming up, upsets, blowouts. Who knows? Tune in to college football on whatever platforms you can to watch it, and cheer along us. Cheer alongside me, pulling for UGA and Georgia State, and pull alongside forever if you want to be a weirdo and root for Tech. So it's been a fun podcast, guys. Glad we could teach y'all some about college football and just brainstorm about this and brainstorm about this world. So we love all of you guys. Make sure you go follow on Twitch, subscribe on YouTube, and we will catch each of you all in the next one. So love you all, guys. Take care.